Makes me a really fun guy.
Yeah.
Means that I got
Yes. Should I just not play piano during the prayer or be simple refrain? Oh, let's give them a break. We should have probably had Avina play singing bowls. But try that, but I didn't arrange it ahead of time, and you'd have to set them up. So we'll just have a normal prayer, just to give you a break. We're set for everything else. The choir's going to do something cool during this. Yeah, if congregation members join in, I won't mind. What's up? Okay. And then this is, so is this going to be, it's reversed. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and post it. It doesn't matter. Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's do that. And everything else is fine. Cool. I'm going to have the choir walk up, not during the readings, because Derek didn't talk about that. So I'll play walking music for them. And, okay. Christopher Wicks, he lived in Silverton, and this is the second time I played this piece this year, and so he dedicated it to me, and I absolutely love it. But he was very proud. He is got a re-exercise position. He sings music, but he was very interesting. I knew him when he was a kid, because we were all he got his degree, and so he said that he left his sanity in a practice from it. It's in his room. He just something happened. It's his oh yeah, he was this 2 years ago. 2 years ago. He's written 300 something pieces. Which is better than mine. Yes. In Wilsonville, he's an organist. She's very creative.
Good morning. Welcome to First Congregational Church of Portland, Oregon, a member of the United Church of Christ denomination. We are a theologically progressive community committed to inclusion and to finding ways to live out Christ's example. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey or in your individual faith explorations, you are welcome here. Please join me in the call to worship. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? God is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? In this I remain confident. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Therefore, wait for God. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Now please rise to sing our opening hymn. Seated. Our service is a little different this morning as our pastor and other conference delegates are attending the annual gathering in Pendleton. I have several announcements today. One is an announcement that the flyer in your bulletins this morning is there to let you know that a special offering for the United Church of Christ will be collected next Sunday on October 6th for neighbors in need. We just wanted to give you a heads up about that. This annual offering supports our national ministries of justice and compassion throughout the United States, including the Council for American Indian Ministries, with a special emphasis this year on access to mental health resources. We're grateful for your consideration and generosity and hope you'll plan on bringing a little extra next week. As I said, our service is a little different. The other thing is next Sunday is also World Communion Sunday, and we're planning a special service. It's very important to hear this part because we're going to start at 10:15, so plan your arrival to come a little bit early. That'll be easy to forget. Set your watches. Also, be sure to put October 20th on your calendar for our next Visioning Dialogue session immediately following worship. We had a great showing last week. I was sorry I could only stay for the first part of it, but I heard it was wonderful. Pastor Derek will be publishing the results of that session very soon as we prepare for the second one. Now, please stand briefly and greet those around you with God's peace. So we have readings this morning from Matthew 5, Mark 4, and Luke 8. These are three different gospel renderings of the same passage. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on the stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. Jesus said, "Do you bring in a lamp to put it under a bowl or bed? Instead, don't you put it on the stand? No one lights a lamp and hides it in a clay jar or puts it under a bed. Instead, they put it on a stand so that those who come in can see the light." Next, we hear three different translations of the same verse in Proverbs 29. First comes King James. Where there is no vision, the people perish, but happy is the one that keeps the law. Next, from New International Version. Where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom's instruction. And finally, from Peterson's Message, if people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what God reveals, they are most blessed. I like that one. And finally, a reflection by Jonathan Swift. Vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others.
So together we're going to look at emergence Christianity, and it's G-E-N-C-E. This did not matter until about 18 months ago, and now it matters terribly. We're here to talk about emergence Christianity, G-E-N-C-E. Not emerging, not emergent, none of those words. It's emergence Christianity when you're talking about the overall thing. Now, the central thesis here is well known to some of you because I've already seen some familiar faces. And you've heard the central thesis or you've read some of the material, either mine or someone else's. The central thesis is that about every 500 years, for some reason, about every 500 years, Latinized Christianity, or that part of the world that received its Christianity through the Latin language, goes through a major upheaval. I don't care whether you call it an upheaval or a reformation or a tsunami or whatever you call it. About every 500 years, we go through a great whoopee, if that is a better term, all right? That is to say, we're in the 21st century right now. And if you go back 500 years, you hit the 16th century, no surprise to anybody, and we called it the Great Reformation, right? If you go back 500 years from that, you hit the 11th century, and we called it the Great Schism or the Great Schism, according to where your mama grew up and how she taught you to say it, but it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. If you go back 500 years from that, you hit the 6th century and the Great Decline and Fall. And of course, if you go back 500 from that, you hit the 1st century and what's called the Great Transformation or the Great Transition, one or the other. Both terms apply. They all have picked up their greats. Now, in the beginning, only this Great Schism was great. Now they're all great because it makes academics happy if everything's fine. So don't leave the greats off. They really matter. Who knows why? We're living in the Great Emergence. When I say that it happens not just to the people of God who are involved, and it happens in very specific cultural contexts. That is to say, it happens in that part of the world that was susceptible to receiving its Christianity through the Latin language as opposed to the Syriac and the Greek, or was colonized by those who so received, or was colonialized by those who so received. That is to say, what I have just said sounds a whole lot like westernized world or like first world. Be really careful. That's not true. It's the colonialized and the colonized that also matter. Emergence Christianity came to this continent last. We're the last to receive it. If you want to see it in some of its earlier forms, look, for instance, in South Africa. You can go home and Google Amahoro, A-M-A-H-O-R-O. That's emergence Christianity as it has existed in South Africa for some 40 or 50 years now. Why was it there? Because they had been colonialized by those who received their Christianity through the Latin language. If you want to see it in Malaysia, where it's been quite active for 30 years, it's Malaysia, which I can't spell, but I love to say because it clears the throat. But it's absolutely there. So it comes to us last. What matters is that we understand this is not a first world phenomenon. This is a phenomenon of mindset, if you will, of cultures that were receptive to Latinized Christianity as opposed to other forms of Christianity. And so why is it that we're susceptible to the 500-year thing? Nobody knows. In all probability, my undergraduate work was in language, and as many of you know, a language shapes how you think, but it works the other way too. You are susceptible to or receptive of a language if it matches the way in which you think. It's a catch and catch can, or like this. So that there is a segment of the world, primarily around the Mediterranean, that was more susceptible to a Latinized way of thinking than to a Syriac or to a Greek way of thinking. And so those cultures that came out of that and received their Christianity through that mechanism, or thought in such a way that they could receive it, go through this thing. Now, having said that very elaborate thing, if there were a rabbi in the room, which I take it there's not, if there were a rabbi in the room, he or she would rise up immediately and say, whoa, it's not a Christian thing you're talking about. It's a Judeo-Christian thing you're talking about. The same 500-year period or cycle also occurs in Judaism. If you go back 500 years from this right here, you hit, of course, the Babylonian captivity, the destruction of the temple, and the birth of Second Temple Judaism. If you go back 500 years from that, you hit the end of the Davidic dynasty, of the age of Judges, and the beginning of the Davidic dynasty, out of which Meshach was to come. So they argue very cogently. They argue that because they are in that part, they came from that part of the world that was susceptible to Latinization, that it is a Judeo-Christian phenomenon. If there were an imam in the room, and I've been interrupted 3 or 4 times over the last few years, so I always say it now instead, he would rise up and say, you're not talking about a Judeo-Christian phenomenon, you're talking about an Abrahamic phenomenon. And he would argue that if you start at 650, the year of our Lord 650, Islam evidences the same 500-year cycle. They choose 650 because it's 650 when you can honestly say, now there is a religion. By 650 of the Common Era, the prophet is dead, of course, and Jerusalem has fallen. Nonetheless, it's about 650 before you can say there is an Islam. Here is a religion. We can define it. We can see it. And if you go 500 years from 650 and 1,000 and now 1,500, you will see the same cycling. It's important, I think, for our purposes, to understand what the imams are saying simply because it puts a different perspective on Arab Spring. They are arguing now that they are going through a period not unlike our 15th century, that Islam is entering a time of reformation analogous to what we did 500 years ago. And there is a good deal of scholarship. If you want to go home and see what it's look at the work of Muhammad Iqbal, I-Q-B-A-L, who is being called now the Martin Luther of contemporary Islam. Or look at Abdul Karman Saroush, S-O-R-O-U-C-A-S-H, at his work. He too is a scholar, and they are concerned now with shaping what Islam is going to be after it goes through this time of reformation, and are arguing that what we're seeing in Arab Spring is nothing in the world but that same 500-year cycle. The 500-year cycle, let me say, one of you, Phil Cooper, whom I don't see right, but Phil was laughing about he had been with Diana Butler Bass last week. There are many historians, and she always reminds me of this, trained historians who get really upset about cycles. There is, especially older historians, say, cycles can become historic determinism. Be careful about their being there. And they're absolutely right. Having said that, however, let me also go forth and say that systems theory, which is a fairly new division of science, systems theory has a very complicated mathematical explanation for why we do this thing every 500 years. And they say, absolutely, it will probably continue. We are trapped in some kind of thing, so it's going to continue to go around. I received a letter last week from a young man whom I had known when he was in seminary, and he said, this will either spook you or confirm you or just simply turn you off. But I was preaching on the 2 Kings, and I discovered that in 2 Kings, the 6th chapter, the 1st verse, it very quietly says that 480 years after the exile, Solomon decided to build a temple. And I thought, 480 years, isn't that interesting? And then if you go to 2 Kings 9:10, you discover that it was 20 years building, and 500 years after the return from exile, he consecrated the temple. And he said, if that doesn't spook you, then, there you are. And I said, all right, I think it may spook me. It's a little too much. It's like, some kinds of prophecy that make you nervous. Nonetheless, the 500-year thing is there. What we have to remember about it is that it's not just about religion. Because we are people involved in religion, we tend to see these things in terms of religion. It is instead everything in the society involved changes, including religion. That is to say, the Reformation is better known to us than many other things. So let's take the Reformation. If you will remember, even in high school, when they taught you the Reformation, they said, the Reformation, it is the birth of individualism. It is the coming of humanism. It's the beginning of a new Renaissance. It is the rise of the middle class. It's the institutionalization of capitalism. It's the rise of the nation state, right? Remember all these things? And oh, by the way, it brought us Protestantism. We're in a thing called the Great Emergence, and it's affecting every single part of what we do. And by the way, it's bringing us emergence Christianity. All right? We have to keep the emphasis in the right place. Society informs the religion that exists in it, and religion is informed by and informs the society. It's a two-way street. You cannot separate the two. It is the function of religion to inform and give meaning to the society in which it exists, but it is the function of the society also to shape religion. So you're not going to extrapolate. You're not going to pull Protestantism out of the Reformation. You're not going to pull emergence Christianity out of the Great Emergence. But you have to understand that it's far more than just religion. It's the Great Emergence that this year, in honor of 2012, the Great China Brain Project, which is owned jointly by IBM, the Chinese government, with some money from the U.S. government. The Great China Brain Project is going to go through 12 petaflops. Now, I'm about to tell you what one of those things is. I don't even understand what I'm about to say. A petaflop is when a computer can make a quadrillion decisions or choices within 1 second accurately. If you do 12 of them, you're doing 12 quadrillion procedures accurately in 1 second. If you lined everybody in Toronto together and hooked us up to some kind of mighty machine, we haven't got a prayer, all of us together, of arriving at that kind of acuity or accuracy, right? And we can't. It is totally beyond us. The machine now exceeds, and we all know it, even though we don't admit it. The machine now exceeds our ability to think. And the result is there can no longer be experts. One of the major characteristics of emergence Christianity is it no longer can be hierarchical. It can no longer be top-down. Those of us who are stuck in Anglicanism are blessed with a lot of bishops and mid-judicatories. Well, we're not quite sure what we're going to do with those. Where are you, Peter? But because in a world of that kind of mechanized ability, there is no way any of us can be an expert. Our only hope is to work communally so that we can bring our little bit and their little bit and his little bit and her little bit to a common pool and try to arrive at some sort of understanding of how things are and how they work. I do not know the figures for your country. I don't think they have been drawn up. But let me tell you right now that we have figures in the States. We've had them now for about 2 years about the size of what we're talking about. That is to say that Barna Research Group, which is, I think, hands down, far and away, the best demographer in religion, from my point of view anyway, in that instead of taking a thesis and going out to the street to see if they can prove it, they go out to the street and find out what's there and come back and draw a thesis. There's a huge difference in the result when you take that approach. And Barna, if you walk up to somebody and say, "Are you an emergence Christian?" they're going to say, "Good God, no." What kind of question is that? But Barna went into the streets in the U.S. I think it's just the U.S. It may have been North America. I think it's just the U.S. And I'm going to stick with that because that's my memory anyway. There are 114 words to the item, to the question. I've seen the instrument. But basically, this is what it says. They walked up to people and said, "Have you at least twice in the last month had a religious or spiritual experience in the company of 2 or more other people who are not in any way affiliated with an established arm of religion in a space that is in no way affiliated with an established arm of religion?" The answer to that, yes, by 32.8% of my fellow Americans. That's the size of what we're talking about here, all right? Now, let me quickly say, there is such a thing as emergence Judaism, and Barna did not ask, "Are you Jewish or Christian?" There's also such a thing as Wiccan, and they did not ask, "Are you Wiccan or Christian?" But 32.8% of my fellow citizens, and I think my fellow Americans, are falling somewhere in one of these categories. That's what this is too large a demographic to ignore, is what I'm saying. This is a demographic that we have to deal with because it is so huge. Now, there are other divisions here also. Then there is internal to the 500 years. There is internal to the 500 years a cycle itself. That is to say, every 500 years we do this. And every 500 years when we do this, there is one resounding question. Where now is the authority? What gets lost at Wittenberg? What got lost at 9/11? What got lost in 1051? What got lost is a sense of who's making the rules. Who will tell us how now shall we live? Who will tell us what meaning is? Who will tell us what the rules are? There's the loss of authority. And every time we do one, then the question is, where now is our authority? And then we have about 100 years to answer the question. And after we've answered the question, we have about 250 years in which we all agree that the answer we have is the right answer. Not that we like it, but that it is the answer. You know, we reserve the right to not like it, as a matter of fact, but it's there. And then we have 150 years in which bit by bit we chip away at the authority until all of a sudden we don't have authority anymore, and we're back again to the tsunami. We're back again to the recycling of the thing, to the beginning of the thing. If you will, I want you to look with me, if you will, at the Reformation, because again, it's more familiar to us. The Reformation didn't begin on October 31st, 1517. The Reformation actually began about 150 years before October 31st, 1517. To give it its academic name, that 150 years is called the Peri-Reformation, the Peri-Emergence, the Peri-Schism. I call it a tick-up because it's a whole lot more fun. But it's 150 years in which the tension builds. Now, coming out of the Great Schism, as we all know, when East and West separated, suddenly Rome became the be-all and end-all of Western Christianity. It's all in Rome. You know, everything, all authority rests with the Pope, rests with the Curia, rests with the Magisterium. And we've got authority, and we know what we're doing, and we know who's going to tell us how to live. Or we do until we get to about 1390. Some people would say, actually, that the Peri-Reformation began with John Wycliffe. I think that's probably a stretch. John Wycliffe dies in 1358, and the argument goes that because he translated the Bible into English, it was the beginning of the Reformation. That Bible didn't make that much of an impact at that time, I don't think, at a popular level. So I'm more content with 1390. Having said that, though, you will find people who do what I do, who will say you start with Wycliffe in 1358. I will absolutely admit that he did something that sure did anger somebody, because in 1414 the Council of Constance dug the poor man up and burned what they dug up and then threw it all in the river, which means he royally pissed somebody, if you will forgive my saying so, which is a good sign you've done something. But by 1390, what you've got is three armed popes, Urban, Clement, and Alexander, running around the north part of Italy and the south part of Europe, all claiming the chair of Peter. And it is at that point that the whole thing loses credibility. Those men are armed to the hilt. They are burning, they are pillaging, they are raping, they are devastating, all in the name of the chair of Peter, all saying, God has chosen me to be the next pope. I am the next Peter. Now, unless God's schizophrenic, two of them are wrong. And it's unlikely. Even the dumbest serf, most illiterate, could figure out this wasn't working. And so you begin the destruction, if you will, of the papacy and the Curia and the Magisterium as the sole source of authority. It's not going to work. And you go from there straight on, and you know it as well as I do. By the 1450s, you've got Constantinople falling. You've got the reintroduction into Europe of all of the wealth of the classical literature, all of which had gone to Constantinople to be preserved. Europe had been in the Dark Ages. We get the Septuagint. What a concept. We've got the Bible back. We get Plato and Aristotle. Plato should have stayed in Constantinople, but Aristotle was okay. We get all of this. We get, in the latter part of that decade, we get some idiot, clearly not an Anglican, who took a perfectly good wine press and put, paper in it instead of grapes. We would never have done that. But nonetheless, he did it, we wouldn't have. Come on, let's get holy here. But anyway, And in many ways, the internet has been, in our peri-emergence, analogous to the printing press in the peri-Reformation. That's a fair thing to say. I need to sidebar here, though, and say that only about 7,000 things were actually printed on that printing press from the time Gutenberg started it until the Reformation itself. From Gutenberg to Luther, there were only about 7,000 documents. 6,000 of them were theologians talking to theologians, which honestly really doesn't matter. It goes like this. It's like an Cuisinart. It stays within itself, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't. It's cynical, but only a failed academic can make that kind of crack, but it's absolutely true. It makes no difference. 1,000 of them, however, and this is part of the genius of the Reformation, 1,000 of them were sheet music. That is to say, Luther and company were smart enough to know that in an illiterate population, you could talk theology till the cows came home, and you could write noble theses, and it wouldn't matter a bit. It just wouldn't. But if you could find one man in a village who could both carry a tune and read, all you had to do was reduce the new theology to him. And then he taught it to the people by singing. And those a mighty fortress is our God. That's Luther being subversive, that all of those marvelous hymns were what brought the Reformation in. And the reason I sidetrack here is that one of the things the established church, the traditional church, you and me, one of the things we failed to understand from the 70s on was that the music makes all the difference in the world. The music makes all the difference in the world. The music makes all the difference in the world. One more praise song and I'm going to kill somebody, right? But that's it got carried that way. This one got carried in the same way. It's the music. 1492 is that part of the Peri-Reformation where some idiot sailed west on a flat earth and didn't fall off the sucker, which was unfortunate. Now, you and I both know that nobody in 1492, very few people, were stupid enough to think the earth was flat. They just didn't. Columbus had reasons for going. He wasn't just off to put. It didn't matter whether it was flat or not. What mattered was that the church taught it was flat. It taught a universe like this, in layers, with the earth as this, and flat earth. It was perfectly all right to watch from the shore and see a boat go over the horizon and know in your heart of hearts that it was going somewhere and that it was around earth, and then go to church and believe in this, because there was no reason to disassociate the two until Columbus was stupid enough to prove that the church was wrong. When he proved that the church was wrong, all of a sudden you're in crisis, because something you've been told from the get-go was true is now clearly shown to not be true. There are in London, I am told, I have not seen them, I am told in London there are 2 or maybe 3 written records of what I'm about to say, which is that assume that you are 62, 63, 64 years old in 1493 or 94, and you're now having to deal with the fact that the world isn't this way. It's not stacked this way, that it's this way. And now the church is wrong. You spent your whole life and gambled your soul on this. And now it's not true. And why does it matter? And this is where the records would break your heart. It matters that if the earth is like this, it's like this instead of like this, and I die in England, if I die in London, in the town of London, and I ascend in a round universe, and my Lord died 1,400, 1,500 years ago in Jerusalem, and it's a round universe, he ascended this way, and I will never see my Lord. That's a heartbreak. Do you understand what I'm saying? Those 2 or 3 written records bear hugely emotional, poignant, if you will, testimony to the fact that whatever you and I do as church people, however we may inform ourselves about what's going on, however correct we may be about what's happening, we still have a pastoral obligation to remember that those who do not see what we see are going to be hurt by our rightness. Rightness is a very serious thing to possess, or correctness, if you want to give it its word. It is not enough to be correct unless you can be correct pastorally. And there are thousands of people who have built their lives on a different kind of Christianity, who have built their lives on a Protestant, on a literalist, on an inerrancy basis. And they have to be respected for what they have done. It's not enough to just go in and cut them off at the knees. We can't do that. We must not do that. Whatever else we do with what we do today. About 20 years ago, I was asked to come to the Anglican Cathedral in Atlanta, Georgia, to talk about the virgin birth on the basis of what I know not, because I had no credentials to do it, but nonetheless, I had just gone with Publishers Weekly, and supposedly that gave me the authority to do it. If you will remember back in the early 90s, those of you who were alive and aware then, the virgin birth was a big deal, right? The historicity thereof. If you believed in the historicity of the virgin birth, you were a Christian. If you didn't, you probably were a progressive or an atheist or something, you know. And so if you had said in the average Anglican, or at least Episcopal in my country, on Sunday morning, said in the average nave, those of you who believe in the historicity of the virgin birth get on this side, and those of you who don't believe, get on this side, you'd have had mass chaos in the center aisle, simply because nobody was willing to say where he or she stood. It was that hot an issue. So I was there to talk about the virgin birth. And in all fairness, there had been 2 or 3 books out that year, and so I was supposed to be doing that. But it was a supper meeting, and the young people were serving the dinner. When the dinner was over, I stood up to talk, and they, of course, all went back to start scraping the dishes. It's great to be part of the young people in any church. God help them. How any of us survives to be a Christian in adulthood, I don't know. But anyway, they were scraping, and there was this kid, 16, I would bet, maybe 17. And he was scraping away. And the longer I talked, the less he scraped. And finally, he just gave the whole thing up and went and sat down in the back of the auditorium in the last row seat and just listened. When it was all over and the adults had all gone, the kid is still sitting back there. And I go back and I said, how are you? He said, I'm fine. I said, may I help you? And he said, well, I've got a question. And my immediate reaction is, dear God, his mother's going to call me because I have committed heresy and ruined her son. And I said with great trepidation, what is your question? And he said, well, I don't understand about them. And he pointed to the empty chairs where the adults had been. I said, what don't you understand about them? And he said, I don't understand about them and the virgin birth thing. And I said, what? And he said, direct quote, it's so absolutely beautiful it has to be true whether it happened or not. That's an emergence answer. That's as near a definition as you're going to get to an emergence. That's what they mean by actual instead of factual.
Welcome to the Cuisinart. I don't know about you, but I feel like my life these days has been thrown into a Cuisinart, all mixed up and not sure who to believe and who has the authority. But perhaps looking optimistically, recognizing that this time that we live in, theologically, religiously, politically, economically, in all the ways, is both a challenge, but also an opportunity. God help us. And may we help each other. Because there's, I think, never been a time as much in the last 500 years that we really need each other, and we need to find ways to communicate safely and positively with one another. Would you please enter into a time of prayer with me? Let us take a few moments of silence. Holy One, as we continue to strive to identify our passions, our strength, and our fears, continue to help us also find our calling as individuals, as a church, as a faith community. Build tenacity and courage into us as we attempt to hold ourselves to a higher standard and embrace our destiny. Give us bravery, but tempered with discernment, and wisdom to see how we can impact our world in new ways as we await your guidance and peace in the midst of the change happening all around us. Grant us also compassion for those in challenging circumstances in their personal lives, and for those that hold the burdens of the ones they love, as well as the plights the members of our community struggle with. We join many across the globe praying for those suffering from the continued escalation of war and violence, whose lives and homes and family members have been taken from them. We lift up those here in our own community whose lives are controlled by addiction, impacted by depression, those who are wrestling with physical illness and other personal challenges. And for those suffering from devastating loss and grief that inevitably follows from it. God, we humbly ask, without consideration for political bias, for this year for wisdom and clarity and humility of thought and action by those who lead our government now, as well as those in the future. Finally, for those in our community here with needs we may or may not know about, or those that weigh heavily on our own hearts, we lift those needs up to you now, in silence or aloud. Holy One, you charge and invite us to cast our cares onto you and to believe you answer us, because you are, among many other things, our parent, mother, and father, the one who cares so much for us than we can even care for ourselves. Thank you for all that you are for us, that you do for us, for the nudges, the still small voice when you speak in our hearts and our minds to take the healthy and healing and peaceful path. Thank you for all that you are to each one of us. Amen.
We give as an act of worship. We give as an expression of generosity. On Sunday, we collectively give as stewards of God's gifts. And to ensure that our church can continue to give meaningful work. Open your hearts and your hands and give generously today. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you, O God, for all that these gifts and offerings represent, both the ministries they support and the hearts and positive motivations behind them. Bless them, dear God, expand and multiply them, and use them for your purposes. Amen. Now please stand for our closing song.
Please be seated. Before I offer a benediction, I'd like to just take a few moments to report to you on our Pastoral Relations Committee. The search committee that brought to you Reverend Derek has become our Pastoral Relations Committee. The Pastoral Relations Committee, or PRC, as we call it, is a group of people whose purpose it is to support our minister in any way that we can, as well as the congregation's relationship with Reverend Derek. Our emphasis is on developing positive communication between you, the congregation, and the pastor, and listening to the pastor's needs and concerns, his hopes and dreams for our church, and also for doing the same thing for you, the congregation. The membership of the PRC includes Sonny Denton, Daniel Hunter, Paris Hancock, Susan Rogers, and myself. Judy Bishop served as our first convener and has now moved on from the committee. We thank Judy immensely for her leadership in getting us started and keeping us on our track. I don't think Judy is here this morning, but Judy, we love you, wherever you are. We hope to create a safe space and support positive communication between the congregation and our pastor. One of the things that we emphasize in this task is asking members of the congregation when they have concerns about something or want to suggest some opportunity to Pastor Derek, that they first talk with him directly. Talk with Derek first. That's the best way to enhance communication between members of the congregation and the pastor. If either the congregation or pastor feels they need assistance with those communications, then we are there to assist you and Reverend Derek. Feel free to talk to any of us at any time. Thank you. And for our benediction before we depart, vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. So may God continue to grant all of us sight, that which we cannot see but must, and that which others are unable to see, what is necessary for our collective growth and well-being. Thank you so much for being here this morning. Thank you for being a kind and compassionate and loving group of people who care for one another, care for the community in which we live, and for this world that is taking all kinds of crazy paths, leading we know not where right now, but having faith because there are good people like us all over this world, in any religion, of any political persuasion, of any economic status or sexual orientation or race. Let's have a little faith in our sisters and brothers and lead first, always, with compassion. Amen.